heartbreak, and reflection. Uncovering betrayal on our 10th wedding anniversary. Yesterday marked our 10-year wedding anniversary. Megan and I, both 35, have been married for a decade. Over the past few months, she's been deep in a significant work project. The past 4 weeks, in particular, have been intense, with her putting in extra hours, arriving early, and staying late to meet her deadline. This project could make or break her career. I work in construction, where our schedule is heavily influenced by the weather. When it rains, we miss time. So, on clear days, we push hard. 12-hour days, sometimes longer. If it's raining when I wake up, I don't go in. And some days, we're sent home if the weather turns, as it's too risky to continue. I usually hit the gym for an hour or two on those days. This past Thursday, we started work at 6 a.m. But mid-morning, the rain came down hard, and we got sent home. As usual, I headed to the gym, but cut my workout short, deciding to surprise Megan downtown with some flowers and hopefully make dinner plans. We hadn't seen much of each other that week, with me going to bed around 9 p.m. while she was still at work, having called earlier to say she'd be late again. It wasn't unusual for this past month. I grabbed some flowers and arrived at her building around 12:30. Nicole, the receptionist, was at her desk. I mentioned I'd gotten there later than planned and asked if she could place the flowers on Megan's desk. Nicole suggested I drop them off myself, saying, "I don't think they've gone to lunch yet." She buzzed me through to the offices, which were deserted. I made my way to Megan's office, the door closed. Normally, I'd just walk in unless Nicole mentioned she was in a meeting. I opened the door, and there he was, some guy standing behind her, nuzzling her neck, while she reached back, her hand over his head. She was giggling in that way only she can, saying, "We've got to get this done." The sight knocked the wind out of me. I slammed the flowers on her desk, muttered, "Happy anniversary," and walked out. I didn't hear her response, just walked past Nicole, said goodbye, and left. I made it to the elevators, then out of the building, before my phone started ringing. I cried all the way home, pulled into the garage, grabbed my camping gear from the rafters, and took off. I drove for about 2 hours to a state park. I had no idea what I was doing. I just needed to escape. I hiked a trail we'd walked before, a 3-hour hike trying to clear my head. I don't drink much, so I had no alcohol with me. I just sat there, thinking. Looking back, I'm grateful I was in such a rush that I didn't bring my .45 caliber handgun, which I normally take camping. We have black bears in the area. They usually scare off but can get aggressive if they're hungry or have cubs. Given how I was feeling, I might have done something reckless. My phone was blowing up with calls from Megan, so I turned it off. I eventually left the park to get reception and turned my phone back on, seeing that my good friend had called. I returned his call, and he said Megan had reached out to him, worried I might do something stupid. We talked for a bit, and I told him I needed to sort through this on my own and would catch up with him on Friday. As I tried to process everything, I reflected on our marriage from the beginning, wondering what I'd missed. We came from completely different backgrounds. My grandfather and mom raised me, teaching me about life. My grandpa had a saying for everything, and he used to tell me that marriage would be the hardest job I'd ever have, something that needed daily effort. God, I miss him. We didn't have much, and I often overheard Mom and Grandpa discussing bills, but they worked hard, and my brother and I never felt we were missing out on anything. Megan, on the other hand, was born into comfort, not overly rich, but definitely well off. She attended a great college, always had the latest fashion, and drove a new car, and she's stunning, an 11 out of 10. I used to joke with her about the silver spoon getting stuck in her throat when she'd cough. When we met, we clicked immediately and started dating. I couldn't believe someone like her would be with me. We dated for a while before she told me about her parents and their lifestyle. Our friends called us the model couple, thinking we were too good-looking not to be models. Our families, however, were more skeptical, worried that the economic differences between us would cause problems. Her dad and I eventually got along, but but it took some time for my mom to warm up. She graduated, got her first job, and we started planning our wedding. We made a pact to immerse ourselves in each other's worlds. She joined me for whitewater rafting while I went to the symphony with her. We tried ziplining, attended art openings. You name it, we did it. We agreed that we needed to embrace each other's interests. She genuinely enjoyed the physical activities, and I found myself liking the symphony and such. I even own 2 tuxes now. Looking back, I can't see any red flags. She left her first 2 jobs because men tried to get in her pants. They'd parade her in front of cameras for photo ops, invite her to conferences where other newbies weren't invited. At one conference dinner, a partner tried to get her drunk and then forced himself into her room that night. She quit. The same thing happened at her next job, so she left again. This 3rd job, where some of the partners are women, doesn't have any of that nonsense, and she seemed really happy there. We seemed really happy. Now it's Friday, and I'm back home. I called her and asked where she was, still at work. In a smart-ass mood, I commented that our marriage seemed to be taking a back seat to her job. She replied that since I wouldn't talk to her, what else was she supposed to do? Fair enough. She said she'd be home in an hour, so I waited. I want to save our marriage. If I've fallen short somehow, I want to fix it. Of course, I want to ask why she did it, but I can't accept an "I don't know" as an answer. Now on to the next story, story 2. My wife was with 32. Different men. Before we got married, now she has to agree to let me sleep with other women, or we're getting a divorce. My wife and I started dating back in high school, and even then, we were already dreaming about married life, talking about what we'd name our kids, where we'd live, all that stuff. We were even each other's firsts. When it was time to choose universities, I got accepted into the same one she had picked. But I also got offered a spot at one of the top universities in the world. Since we'd always planned for her to be a stay-at-home mom, we decided I should go to the better university to boost my future earning potential, even though it meant we'd be in a long-distance relationship. During my time at university, I did my best to visit her almost every weekend, and I honestly thought things between us were going great. Just last week, we were at a party with some mutual friends, reminiscing about the old days, when one of her friends casually mentioned how wild she was during university. At first, I almost didn't catch it, but when I looked over at my wife, her face had gone pale, and she was giving her friend a look that could kill. I decided not to confront her right then and there, or even on the drive home, but she could tell something was off by how I suddenly went quiet. Once we were home, I made sure our boys, who are 13 and 16, were asleep before I confronted her about what her friend had said. I told her that if I felt she was lying, I'd make her call that friend right then and there to talk about her university days while I listened. She hesitated a bit, but eventually she admitted that she was really into clubbing during university, and that it led to several hookups and even a few ongoing friends with benefits situations. She kept saying that she was just an immature kid back then, and that I shouldn't hold it against her. At that point, I was afraid I'd lose my temper, so I left the house and spent the night at a hotel. The whole night, she kept texting and calling, alternating between telling me she loves me and giving me every excuse under the sun. She kept insisting that it was no big deal and that things are different now because we're married. But for me, nothing has changed. The fact that we've been married for 18 years doesn't change the reality that she cheated. This whole time, I believed we shared something special, that we were each other's first and only. But now I see that it was all just a lie. I spent a few days really thinking it over, even went so far as to meet with one of my friends, who happens to be a divorce lawyer. Despite everything, I still love her and want to work things out, but I can't and won't stay in a marriage where I feel this way. Every time I look at her, I feel a wave of disgust. I feel like I waited for her, even though I had other options, while she made me the butt of a joke. So 2 days ago, I sat down with her at the table, pen and paper in hand. while our sons were with her parents. I told her to write down the names of the men she'd slept with and give me an estimate of how many times it happened. If she couldn't remember their names, I told her to just make some up. I warned her that if I ever found out she lied about the numbers, I would divorce her immediately, so she needed to be as accurate as possible. In the end, the total came out to about 27 men, with the number of encounters ranging from 1 to 32. Then, I told her that I do want to reconcile, but I have conditions. Since she seems to think that sleeping with others while in a committed relationship is perfectly fine, I told her I would be sleeping with 27 women, the same number of times she just admitted to, at times of my choosing without giving her a heads up. I made it clear this was non-negotiable for our reconciliation, and if she disagreed, she needed to tell me right then and there, or I would have my lawyer start drafting the divorce papers. At first, she just looked at me, bewildered, before she started shouting and crying, saying it's different now that we're married and that I would be cheating. I explained that since I was telling her in advance, it wasn't cheating, and if she agreed to this to save our marriage, I would take it as her consent. Since then, she's been trying everything to change my mind, crying day and night, having angry outbursts, offering me anything I want except for that. But nothing's going to make me budge. She either accepts it, or we go through with the divorce. I've given her until the end of this week, Friday, to make her decision. I know some people might think I'm overreacting, so let me address that right now. I'm not afraid of getting a divorce. I'm still young enough to meet someone new. Plus, I own a few businesses that put me in contact with some very savvy lawyers who help minimize my taxable income and make smart business decisions that, as a bonus, also protect most of my assets in a divorce. I'll pay more than what's necessary in child support to make sure my kids are well taken care of, but she'll be getting the bare minimum in alimony. In my view, I wouldn't have married her if I'd known she had cheated, so she shouldn't benefit from our marriage. Am I wrong for potentially throwing away an 18-year marriage over infidelity that happened before we tied the knot? Now on to the next story, story 3. Am I the asshole for telling my dad? I'm glad he's dying of cancer after his wife convinced him to disown me for being gay. It's 5 a.m. and I'm just sitting here, feeling like life's really dragging me down. This might get long, and I might ramble. Sorry about that, but I need some outside perspective. A bit about me. I'm Alex, 24, my dad's Chris, 44, and his ex-wife, Susan, is 46. My mom passed away in a car accident when I was 8. Moving forward. After my mom died, it was just me and my dad for a long time. Honestly, things were pretty good. We spent tons of time together, working on cars, fixing stuff around the house, and just learning all the things you never get taught in school. Despite everything that's gone down, I'm grateful I got to see the real side of my dad before Susan, his ex-step-wife, whatever she is now, came into the picture. A few months before my 15th birthday, my dad introduced me to Susan. Right off the bat, she was distant. She said a quick hi to me, then spent the entire evening talking only to my dad. He kept trying to bring me into the conversation since the night was supposed to be about us getting to know each other, but she didn't seem to care. He even mentioned how we were working on a car together, one that would be mine when I got my license, still have it in my garage. She just shrugged and quickly switched the topic, talking about some restaurant she wanted to check out with my dad. The next week, my dad asked if I wanted to hang out with him and Susan to help build a connection. I said yes, because honestly, I wanted him to be happy, and I figured I should at least try to get along with this person who was now part of my life. We went to the movies and then grabbed some food, but Susan barely spoke to me. I tried asking her about her job, no answer. I asked her about her hobbies or what she liked to do for fun, nothing. I even mentioned I liked basketball and asked if she was into sports, still nothing. My dad noticed the awkwardness and nudged her to talk to me, but it felt forced, and I still don't get why she was so cold. I wasn't even out as gay at that point. She just seemed to hate me for existing. 3 months after meeting her, my dad told me he had proposed. I couldn't believe it. I pointed out how she couldn't stand me and refused to interact, So why would he marry someone who'd make our home feel like a prison for the next 3 years, until I moved out? He brushed it off, saying she'd warm up to me eventually and that she'd told him I was the one not trying. Me? I had invited her to all my basketball games with my dad, and she never came once. There was no lack of effort on my part. But she moved in, and just like I expected, the house felt cold. I ended up spending all my time in my room because I just didn't feel wanted. The place didn't feel like home anymore. A month before I turned 16, they got married, and guess what? I wasn't even invited. It was a child-free wedding because they didn't want distractions, apparently. I didn't really care by then. My dad tried to make it up to me, promising we'd spend time together after the wedding, just the two of us. But I told him I'd believe it when it happened. We weren't spending much time together anyway. We didn't even work on my car together anymore. I was doing it alone whenever he bought the parts. He said he bought us tickets to visit my mom's parents and see where she grew up. Thinking about it still makes me emotional. None of this would have happened if my mom was still here, and I wouldn't have to deal with all this mess. When I turned 16, I asked my dad if we could talk, just the two of us, without Susan. He agreed, and we went to the park, a place I loved because my last memory of my mom was there. I came out to him, and it was emotional. He wasn't mad. He put his hand on my shoulder, told me he loved me, and that this didn't change anything between us. I believed him. I asked him not to tell Susan because I knew she'd make it about her religion and spew the usual hateful stuff people like that say. For a while, things were good between us again. My dad went back to helping me with my car, and we finally got it running just after I got my permit. A few months later, I got a boyfriend and decided to introduce him to my dad. Of course, Susan was there too, and I had a bad feeling about it, but I went ahead, hoping my dad would have my back. He didn't. That night, Susan kept throwing jabs like, "You don't look or sound gay, maybe you're just confused," or, "There are plenty of pretty girls at your school. Why don't you talk to one of them?" And, "You still have time to change your path." All that garbage. My dad just sat there in silence. He'd try to make me feel better with a half-hearted smile now and then, but it didn't help. Even my boyfriend, now my ex, was visibly uncomfortable and didn't feel welcome. I couldn't blame him. I felt the same way. After that wonderful evening of judgment, I dropped my boyfriend off and came home. Susan stopped me at the door while my dad was in the shower and said she didn't want him back in her house, claiming it was wrong to flaunt sin in front of her. I fired back, saying it was my house first, my mom's house before that, and still my dad's house. Susan was just a guest, married or not. She stormed off, and I figured that was the end of it. But of course it wasn't. After that, my dad started to pull away from me. We stopped hanging out like we used to, and he never bothered asking about my boyfriend. I figured Susan was filling his head, and I was right. We ended up fighting constantly over stupid things. I accused him of putting his holier-than-thou wife above his own son, and he shot back, calling me ungrateful for everything he's done for me. He said he couldn't just stand by and accept the lifestyle I'd chosen. He went from being my biggest supporter, loving me for who I was, to practically hating me in just a year. By the time I turned 17, things hit a breaking point. Susan and I got into a heated argument, and she told me I was destined for hell because I was living in sin. My dad just stood there and let her say it. I begged him to say something, to defend me, just once. But he refused, saying he agreed with her. I called him a coward and an embarrassment of a father. He shot back, telling me my mom would be ashamed of me and that I wasn't his son anymore. He told me to leave and never come back. So I did. I ended up living in my car for a month before my boyfriend found out. Instead of helping, he dumped me, saying it was embarrassing to date someone who was homeless, and he didn't want the extra judgment at school. I was left with no dad, no mom, no boyfriend, just me and my car. I tried to keep going to school, but eventually, I quit. It didn't seem worth it anymore. I survived, though. I did what I had to. Stole stuff and sold it. Did other things to get by. I drove until I didn't know where I was anymore. At 20, I found a job, got a place of my own, and slowly built a new life, meeting new people along the way. Now, here I am, 24 years old, living states away, and I guess I'm doing okay. I'm not super successful or anything, but I'm comfortable. I work at a small garage, got a boyfriend I've been living with for a year, and friends who actually care about me. I haven't spoken to my dad since the day I left. I haven't kept tabs on him, never looked him up on social media. I just don't care to. Then, about a week ago, I get a message on Facebook. It's from my dad. He says he's been trying to find me for years but couldn't track me down, which makes sense since I haven't had social media. He tells me he divorced Susan and desperately wants to fix things between us before he dies. He's got cancer, but just to be clear, it's not terminal. He's getting treatment, and yeah, he could die. But honestly, I could also die slipping on my way to the bathroom. Life's unpredictable like that. He said he regretted kicking me out and never really agreed with all the stuff Susan was saying, but he felt pressured to go along because she always seemed so certain and righteous. I don't know, man. He wasn't even religious before meeting her, but I guess hooking up with her changed that real quick. Now, he wants to meet up and catch up on everything. He also mentioned that if he dies, the house, cars, and whatever money he has, which isn't much, would all go to me. But honestly, I couldn't care less. So I replied, "You threw me out in favor of that witch of a wife, who did everything she could to drive us apart, and you let her." I was 17, doing whatever it took to survive, including letting grown men pay me just so I wouldn't starve. It's a miracle I'm even alive, and I don't believe in any kind of heaven or afterlife. But if there is one, Mom is looking down at you with nothing but hate for what you did to me. I'm glad you're suffering now. Maybe it's some justice for how you treated me when I needed you the most, and you told me to get lost. You should have stayed with Susan. At least then you'd have someone by your side when you die. The next time I want to hear about you is when someone tells me you're gone so I can piss on your grave. Don't ever contact me again. Then I blocked him. Now I'm just feeling kind of empty. I don't feel good about what I said, but I couldn't stop myself. My boyfriend says I'm not in the wrong, but thinks I could have been gentler, considering he's sick. My friends are all saying screw that, I should have been even harsher. I think my boyfriend's just worried I'll regret my words if my dad dies, but honestly, I don't know. It's not like he's dying tomorrow, so if you guys think I messed up, maybe I could try to fix things. There won't be an update. This account's probably going to get banned soon, but the post will still be up, so I'll be able to see the replies. Thanks in advance for any thoughts. I'll respond until the account gets axed. If I stop replying, it means they got me. Now on to the next story, story 4. My boyfriend, who's always been against cheating, cheated on me and then tried to take his own life out of self-hatred and struggles with alcoholism. I'm heartbroken. Sorry if this is super long, but the last 48 hours have been the craziest of my life. I'm 22F, and my boyfriend, 21M, and I have been together for almost 2 years. It's been the happiest time of my life. I've never felt so close, so safe, and so in love with another person. I really thought he was my soulmate, and I know I'm young, but I can't even put into words how much he means to me. He's my partner, my best friend, and I know he feels the same way. We got together because his sister, who's been my best friend since 6th grade, introduced us. He'd always had a crush on me, and nearly 2 years ago, we shared our first kiss and have been inseparable since. Well, 2 days ago, he told me we needed to talk, and I immediately got anxious. I was bracing myself for bad news, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said. He drove us to the park near my house, and we just sat there in silence, waiting for him to speak. He looked like he was about to throw up. He finally told me that a few days ago, at his friend's going-away party, he cheated on me with his friend's sister, a girl he used to have a thing with before we started dating. She led him up to her room, and they kissed. The second those words left his mouth, I slapped him hard and told him to take me home. He just nodded, started the car, and drove. The reason cheating was the last thing I ever expected from him is because he's always been a huge anti-cheater. He's always said how disgusting and unforgivable cheating is, no matter the reason. Drunk, high, heartbroken, he didn't care. There were no excuses. He's seen how cheating wrecked people in his life, and he was firm on his stance. I'd never met anyone more against infidelity, and that's why I never imagined he'd do something like this to me, or to anyone, really. On the drive back, he asked if I even wanted to talk about it. I was furious, but agreed, so we pulled over. He told me that night he was drinking, and his friend's sister kept pushing shots on him all evening. For context, my boyfriend has a history of alcohol and substance abuse. His parents were drunks, his grandparents were drunks, and even now, he has a drink every night and always keeps alcohol on hand. His family's a mess, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, he was wasted that night. He's at that house a couple of times a week, and every time he's there, he drinks. This girl has been jealous of our relationship since day one, especially after they hooked up once and he immediately cut her off. He said she lured him up to her room with the promise of more shots. Once they were alone, she told him, "You deserve this for what you did to me," and kissed him. He didn't resist. They made out, and when I demanded to know what happened next, he admitted he put his hand down her pants. I slapped him again and screamed at him to take me home. I didn't want to hear any more, and I still don't even know how far it went. On the drive back, I was yelling and crying, cursing at him, and he just looked like he wanted to die. A few hours later, after crying my eyes out, my best friend, who's also his sister, called me, furious. She said that when he got home, he parked his car and just went for a walk. After that, he locked himself in his room. Even through my own pain, I knew him well enough to be worried, so I told her to check on him and make sure he didn't hurt himself. She banged on his door, and that's when she found out he had taken all his migraine pills and drank alcohol, trying to overdose. One of our friends rushed him to the hospital. Right now, he's in a psychiatric hospital and will be there for a few days. I can't even begin to explain how mixed my emotions are. Anger, sadness, love, grief, all swirling together. The next day, I went by his place to pick up my stuff, and that's when I found something. I was looking through his phone, checking for texts. Apparently, he tried to grab his phone when they were taking him to the ER, but they wouldn't let him. And I found pages and pages of notes he'd written. They were full of his thoughts, his self-disgust, the hatred he felt for himself, his confusion over why he'd done this. He wrote about how scared and trapped he felt in that moment, how he saw himself as a monster who'd become the very thing he always hated, and through all of it, his love for me stood out. The light of his life, the most precious thing in the world. Reading his words, I just broke down all over again. There was so much there, and it shook me to my core. I wish this was simple and I could just see him as a piece of trash, but I know it's not that black and white. This is something bigger, beyond me, beyond our relationship. I still love him so deeply, and his pain weighs heavily on my heart, even if that sounds cheesy or pathetic. I don't want to lose him, but I know I have to if I want to keep any self-respect or the respect of others. This whole thing feels like a nightmare I can't wake up from. My boyfriend, who's always been against cheating, cheated on me and then tried to take his own life out of self-hatred and struggles with alcoholism. I'm heartbroken. Edit. I genuinely believe he was taken advantage of by this jealous, malicious girl, and that's why I've been so conflicted. I called him at the hospital today just to let him know he's loved and to take care of himself while he's there. I told him, "Name, you were taken advantage of," and he just responded, "But I still did it." We agreed that once he's out, we'll have one final conversation, but it's clear that we need to go our separate ways to heal and grow. We both still love each other so much, and if we're truly meant to be, if we're soulmates, maybe one day we'll find our way back to each other. Only time will tell. Now on to the next story, Story 5. I'm the child of an affair, and I'm exhausted from always feeling unwanted and overlooked. I'm not really sure how this works, but my friend keeps talking about this site, so I figured why not give it a shot. Sorry if this is long. I've got a lot on my mind. I'm Ellie, 18, born on January 29th, 1990. My parents had been married for 15 years when I was born, but the catch is they were married to other people. I'm the result of a 14-month affair at their office. Today's supposed to be my high school graduation party. I guess technically it is. My parents decided to split the cost, which really means splitting the effort. They brought me to Riverside Park here in Bellevue. Only my mom's sticking around the whole time, though. My parents can't even talk to each other unless it's about picking me up or dropping me off. There's pizza, not my favorite, but it's fine, and a cake. At least they got buttercream icing this time. I've got a bunch of friends, and like a dozen of them showed up. There wasn't enough food for everyone, not really surprising. I knew that going in. We took a walk along the trails, but I couldn't stay out too long because I knew my mom would complain about being left alone. The party lasted about an hour and a half, and then my mom was ready to bail. I would have loved to leave with my friends, but my mom insisted that I drive her here in my 2000 Dodge Neon. She didn't want to waste gas in her new Escalade, and my stepdad was out so she couldn't pump her own gas. Plus, I'm not even allowed to touch her car. It's so ridiculous. So I had the joy of driving her back home, listening to her go on about how I seemed ungrateful for the party. When we got home, I opened my cards. My friends are the best. They wrote the sweetest things and gave me some cash. My mom and stepdad gave me $20, and my dad and stepmom gave me $25. I knew he'd do that. My dad always has to one-up my mom. For two people who spent months hooking up in an office, they sure can't stand each other now. None of my siblings came to the party. They all live on their own, have jobs, but no cards, no texts, nothing. I'm used to being left out, though. Honestly, I was relieved when I turned 11, and my parents stopped making my siblings watch me. Listening to 5 people who are supposed to care about you call you a waste of time. That does something to an 8-year-old. I know I probably sound like I'm whining about stupid stuff, but it's just sad. I feel sad all the time. It's like I don't matter to any of them. My parents screwed up, not me, but it feels like I'm the one paying for it. But hey, some good news. My Aunt Linda's card came yesterday, and it had $150 in it. Seriously, she's the best. Her and my cousins are the only reason I still love Christmas. I called her to thank her, and we ended up chatting for 2 hours because each of my cousins wanted to talk too. In 3 months, I'll finally be living near them and far away from all this mess. I can't wait. My parents are already trying to guilt-trip me, but I'm so over it at this point. The funniest part was my dad acting like me moving out of state was why he wasn't helping with college, like he was ever going to help anyway. I'm heading to the University of Missouri. Go Tigers! I'm so excited because my aunt and cousins live nearby in Boonville, so I'll get to see them all the time. Mizzou was my first choice. I checked out Iowa and Iowa State too, but Iowa got scratched off the list fast thanks to the most obnoxious tour guide I've ever met. Alicia, if you're reading this, your attitude was enough to make me lose all respect for pole vaulters. Iowa State was okay, but it just couldn't compete with being near my aunt and cousins. I'm going pre-med, then I'm planning to get into med school and become the world's greatest plastic surgeon. I've dreamed of being a doctor since I was a kid, long before I even knew about Grey's Anatomy. Move-in day on August 15th is the start of the journey to Dr. Ellie Turner, MD, saving the world one facelift at a time. All right, enough about my life. Let's get to why I'm writing all this. I need to know if I'm being a jerk here. One of my friends thinks my plan is kind of a jerk move. What I haven't told my parents is that once I move, I'm not coming back. I've got plenty of scholarships lined up and student loans will cover the rest. My Aunt Linda said I can stay with her during breaks and holidays, and I plan to get a job somewhere near Columbia. I'm not asking my parents to help me move. I'm leaving 2 days early and heading out without telling them. I'm serious. I'm not setting foot in Nebraska again. Does that make me an awful person? I just don't feel like I owe anyone an explanation. I've always been an afterthought to them, and this graduation party is just one small example in a lifetime of the same crappy behavior. Most of my friends agree with me. They all say my family sucks, but one friend said my plan is kind of harsh. That's why I came back to share the full story, since so many people asked about it. I've pieced together what I know over the years, mostly from overhearing conversations or when my parents would argue. This all happened ages ago. Let's start with my dad, who I'll call Frank. Frank, 57 million, married my stepmom, Karen, 52 feet, back in 1975. He works at Mutual of Omaha and he makes good money. From what I can guess, based on my oldest brother's birthday compared to their wedding date, they probably had to get married. I've got two older brothers on that side, Michael, 32 megabytes, and Matt, 30 megabytes. Karen has always been a stay-at-home mom. My mom, Linda, 56F, is married to Jim, 58M, my stepdad. He works at Kiewit. I have no idea what he actually does, but he makes decent money too. I've got three older siblings on this side, Jessica, 32F, Jenna, 29F, and Jake, 26M. My mom always says she was an independent woman before Jim came into the picture, but once she got pregnant with my oldest sister, she became a stay-at-home mom. That was until a year after Jake started school, when she said she was bored and got a job at Mutual of Omaha. I have no idea what she did there, but I do know she wasn't my dad's secretary. At least they weren't that cliché, thank goodness. I'm not exactly sure when the affair started, but it went on for a while, right up until my mom got pregnant with me. I remember when I was about 7, I got into Jenna's makeup, and she said, "I wish Grandma hadn't stopped Mom from aborting you." I have no idea if that's true or just her being mean. I've only ever seen one photo of me with my grandma, and she was smiling while holding me, so maybe she liked me. She passed away when I was a year and a half old. My mom and Jim were apparently going through a rough patch, so there was never any doubt that I wasn't his kid. The affair almost ended both marriages, but in the end, both my parents decided to stay with their spouses. None of them wanted another kid. My parents agreed to split custody, so I'd spend 1 week at each house. They've never swapped weeks or made exceptions, except for Christmas. I spend the 23rd and 24th with my dad's side, and the 25th and 26th with my mom's side. Both my parents told their spouses the affair was a one-time thing, but Jim went into full detective mode. He found an old hotel receipt from 8 months before and dug through bank statements. When they'd fight, which was often when I was there, he'd bring up stuff like, "I'm checking the bank statements. You're acting like the same bitch you were when you were screwing Frank." He even had friends at Mutual who said the rumors had started well before he found out. Eventually, I think my mom just told him to stop. I know Jim once delivered a letter to Karen, trying to wreck my dad's marriage. But good luck with that. Karen's never leaving her sugar daddy. And as far as I can tell, my dad's still cheating. Both of my parents have paid the price, though. Even now, nearly 18 years later, my step-parents love to throw the affair in their faces during arguments. My dad bends over backward to keep Karen happy. If she wants something, he drops everything to make it happen. My mom hasn't worked since she had me, and Jim guilt trips her every time she goes somewhere alone, interrogating her about it when she gets back. The funniest part about all this is how my parents, with their denial and blame shifting, somehow manage to blow up their own lives and still act like it's my fault. My siblings have always resented me. They talk like their parents are perfect when I'm not around, like everything's just peachy. No fighting, just this great, loving atmosphere. But when I'm there, it's a whole different story. The tension from my step-parents toward me is obvious, and the cheater always does whatever they can to make them feel better about it. My siblings have never wanted anything to do with me. I get that they're a lot older than me, and now that I'm grown, I kind of get it. But I've been on the outside looking in for as long as I can remember. Even when they became adults, they rarely showed up to my birthdays or events. And if they did, it was usually because they'd get something like a free dinner out of it. I'm used to it by now. But the little things I've learned over the years sting the most. Like my mom and Jim took the whole family to Disney every time one of them turned 6. I've never been to Disney. My dad would take his kids out to eat wherever they wanted for their birthdays, at least when we were younger. That doesn't happen as much now that they're older, but for my birthday, it's usually fast food, and it's just me and my dad. I wasn't invited to any of my siblings' weddings. They were either no kids allowed or held on the opposite parents' weekend. Now that I'm 18, Jamie's getting married in September, and I'm not invited because it's on my dad's weekend. Like, come on. I'm 18. We don't need to follow the custody agreement anymore. This kind of stuff happened with vacations and parties almost every single time. Those are the big things, but there's a million smaller things too. My mom used to take my older sisters for mani-pedi days, and I was always told it was a big girl thing. When I got older, it became her catching up with her adult daughters. I've never really connected with anyone on my dad's side. They're all about boy things, and girl stuff just isn't on the radar. I've seen photos of my siblings doing all sorts of activities: youth sports, dance, science camps, art camps, you name it. I didn't get to do any of that unless it was to save face, or had overnights so I'd be out of the house. I didn't start doing extracurriculars until middle school, and that was all through the school itself. I know it sounds whiny, but it really hurts. My siblings got to do all these great things, and I didn't. I know lots of kids don't get to do this stuff, or even have new clothes. I did, because keeping up appearances was everything. But my parents had the money. They just chose not to spend it on me. My mom's older brother is nice enough, but he's pretty hands-off with kids. I never had grandpas. One grandma passed when I was a baby, and the other one's just a mean old lady, but she's like that with everyone. The only relatives I really have that are great are my Aunt Dinah, who's my dad's younger sister, her husband Henry, and my cousins Gabby and Grace. Gabby had what she calls a mishap, so Aunt Dina's a grandma now to Elias, who's the cutest little guy. I love them all so much. I'm not super close with Henry since he's quiet, but he's really nice. I only get to see them every other Christmas because they spend the other one in Norway with Henry's family. I did get to stay with them for 2 weeks last year, and it was incredible. I've always suspected that Aunt Dina's the reason my dad doesn't completely ignore me. Anyway, just 2 more months and I'm leaving Bellevue for good. I'll be around my aunt and cousins, and I can't wait. I honestly wonder how long it'll take my family to even notice I'm gone, or that I haven't called. Wait till you hear this mess. So, last year I told you all about my plan to cut off my family once I left for college, and I stuck to it. I left on August 13th, 2 days before move-in day, without saying a word. On the 14th, I got a text from my dad asking where I was. I replied, "At college in Columbia." He didn't respond, and that was the last I heard from anyone until October 4th. My mom messaged me asking if I was coming home for Thanksgiving, because they were going to my brother Matt's place in Lincoln, and she wasn't sure I'd want to make the extra drive. It's literally just an hour from Bellevue. I ignored it. That gave me my answer on how long it'd take them to call me the first time. I went a whole year without hearing from them. I didn't block anyone, didn't hide my Facebook page. I got 3 messages total, the one about Thanksgiving and one from each parent about Christmas. I didn't go home for Christmas since my aunt and uncle were in Norway. I ended up house-sitting for them instead. During the spring semester, they didn't even bother reaching out. Meanwhile, I've loved every minute of my first year here. I get to spend more time with my aunt and cousins than ever before, and I'm obsessed with being Auntie Ellie to little Elias. I found a job as a hostess, made some good friends, and even met my boyfriend. He's also pre-med and has a job, so we're both super busy. We mostly spend our time studying, or studying, if you catch my drift. But now I've got a huge problem. My boyfriend suggested I get a credit card to start building credit, so I went to my bank to look into it. They had a few options for people with no credit history, so I picked one and they ran my credit. Turns out, I didn't have no history. I had a credit score of 415. I was completely baffled. When I dug into it, I discovered 2 maxed-out, defaulted credit cards in my name, one for $3,000 and another for $4,000, both unpaid for over 6 months. I called the card company for a statement, and the charges were all for wedding-related stuff, catering, a DJ, things like that. And then it clicked. My brother Jamie got married last September, and as usual, it was planned to make sure I couldn't be there. I called my mom, furious, and she tried to downplay it all. I don't think I've ever yelled at her like that before. She went on about how family helps family, but I told her straight up that she stole from me. She denied it, saying Mark needed the money for the wedding and was planning to pay it off. When I pointed out the cards were in default, she just kept making excuses. Then she started on this whole spiel about how things are tight right now, they're overextended, and they just needed a little help, especially with the wedding costs. I lost it. I told her they didn't even want me at the wedding they paid for with money stolen from me. She tried to turn it around, saying I was always invited and just didn't come. Then came the guilt trip about how we all have to be there for each other, how Mark takes care of everyone and just needed a little help from me. The reality is, Mark doesn't care about me. To him, I'm just a reminder of his failures. I finally told her she had a week to fix it, then hung up. I've been so angry for 2 days straight. I can't believe they would pull this crap, especially after everything I've put up with my whole life. I finally get away from them, and this is what they do. I told Aunt Dinah everything, and she said I should go to the police. And honestly, I'm seriously considering it. This whole mess dragged on for a long time, which didn't surprise me. There were several continuances, but eventually Mark Whitmore took a plea deal. I asked the prosecutor about my mom's involvement too, since she clearly knew what Mark had done. He told me they could potentially go after her, but it would be much tougher. They had a lot of evidence showing Mark was the one who opened the credit cards and used them directly. My mom could always claim she found out after the fact, and while there might be something there, it wasn't enough to justify the cost of pursuing charges against her. I accepted that. I'm just glad it's over. It took nearly 2 years from start to finish. Thankfully, I got all the debt removed from my record and my credit score repaired. The best part was getting to testify at Mark's sentencing. They let me tell my entire story, laying out all the trauma I'd endured because of him, my mom, and my siblings. It felt incredible to finally unload all that. Now, here's the best part. The original plea deal was for Mark to get 18 months in prison and a $15,000 fine. But the judge went further, sentencing him to 30 months and a $20,000 fine. He called Mark a bad father and an even worse man. I'm so grateful the judge saw him for who he really is. My Aunt Dina, Uncle Henry, cousins Gabby and Grace, and my boyfriend were all there to support me. Not the same boyfriend from my earlier posts. I had another in between, but I've been dating this guy for about 8 weeks now. It was awesome of him to drive up with me from Missouri. I had to hold back from cheering when they walked Mark out in cuffs. My mom and siblings were all crying and glaring at me, but my dad and Brianne were there too, giving them death stares right back. It was a whole scene. I thought that would be the end of it, at least for a while. My first week back on campus after the sentencing felt strangely calm. I'd been dealing with this for 2 years. It started when I was a sophomore, and now I'm just finishing my senior year, plus an extra fall semester. But hey, a lot has happened over these 4 years. Then that calm got completely wrecked. The next Friday, I was walking back to my apartment after class when my entire family showed up on campus, demanding we talk. My mom, Jessica, Jenna, Jamie, all 3 of their spouses, and Jessica's 2 kids. They were pulling out every stop on the guilt trip. I agreed to sit down at a table on campus to talk, but I wasn't about to take them back to my place. I quickly texted my boyfriend to let him know what was going on. They started off with this whole sob story, and my mom was already crying from the first word. Jessica took over and said, "Basically, Mom's in a bad spot financially since Mark's in jail and there's no income." I asked, "It's been a week. Don't you have savings? Were you not prepared for this? You had plenty of notice that Mark was going to prison." Jessica went on, "They've been struggling for a while now, and the defense costs were really high. We need you to help make this right." I just stared at her, completely blank. I need to make this right? Are you kidding me? She kept pushing. Yes, it didn't have to get this far. We could have paid you back and cleared this up. Going straight to the police was selfish and disrespectful to the family that's loved and cared for you. I laughed out loud. Jada, always the hothead, snapped, "You've always been such a brat, just sign this paper." Jamie shot her a look like, "Calm down." I just asked, "What paper?" They pulled out some ridiculous statement and asked me to sign it. It listed all these reasons why everything I said during the case was false. I couldn't believe it. This was the dumbest Hail Mary I've ever seen. Mark's already been sentenced, he's already in prison, and now they want me to sign some crazy paper saying I made it all up? What on earth was their end game? I looked around at all of them. They'd sort of formed a horseshoe around me at this point. "There's no way I'm signing that, and if any of you try to forge my name, I'll go to the police, just like I did with Mark." Jada jumped back in, all fired up. "Yes, you are. We're not leaving until you do, and you're not going anywhere either." Right then, my boyfriend walked up with two of our other friends. You could see this moment of realization on their faces, like it finally hit them that they had zero power over me anymore. I grabbed the paper, walked around them with my friends beside me, and tossed it right in the nearest trash can. None of them said a word, and none of them tried to follow us. Now on to the next story, story 6. My wife and I decided to give each other hall passes for our 10th anniversary, and let's just say it didn't end well. I'm Alex, 35, and I've been married to my wife Emily, also 35, for the last 11 years. We met during our last year of college, hit it off instantly, and never looked back. After dating for just a year, we got engaged and tied the knot 4 weeks later. Our marriage has been pretty great overall. Sure, it's not perfect. We've had our share of arguments and heated moments, but after 12 years together, we've definitely gotten better at navigating the ups and downs of married life. Over the years, we've gone on lots of adventures and saved up a good amount of money. Just before our 10th anniversary, we had the big conversation about starting a family. We both agreed that we wanted just one kid, and we talked about the timing. We decided on one more year without kids so we could check off a few bucket list items. That year, we went skydiving, finally took our dream trip to Italy, hit the beach, and visited some amusement parks. We didn't just focus on each other, we also spent time reconnecting with old friends. Since we'd never had bachelor or bachelorette parties, we jokingly called this our last year of freedom before becoming parents. But it was on our 10th anniversary, right before this so-called freedom year, that we made a choice that's causing us all the drama we're dealing with now. For context, Emily and I have always had a really good sex life. We're both pretty high libido, and we share a lot of the same interests. We also both knew we'd been quite active before meeting each other. Nothing too wild, just about a dozen partners each, and a few special experiences back in college. Since getting together, though, it's always been just us. We planned a big day of fun for our 10th anniversary, ending with a fancy dinner and a night in a suite at a swanky hotel. During dinner, Emily started asking me questions, wanting to look back on our years together. It was great, and we spent a long time talking about our favorite memories. Then she asked, "What's something you miss about being single?" I answered honestly, "Don't get mad, but I kind of miss one-night stands." She laughed, which put me at ease, and admitted, "Yeah, I kind of do too." That kicked off a conversation about what we liked about one-night stands, and reminiscing about our first night together, which had started as a casual hookup after a party. That's when I threw out, "We've got all these plans for the year ahead. What if we added a one-night hall pass to the list?" Emily seemed intrigued but cautious. "Maybe," she said. "You don't think that's too much? We've never done anything like that." I pressed on. "I don't think so. Let's talk about it this week and see how we feel." She agreed, and we enjoyed the rest of our night. Later that week, we revisited the hall pass idea. After some back and forth, we decided to go for it. We'd each have 1 year to use the pass, with the agreement that Emily would go off birth control on our 11th anniversary. We set some ground rules. It was a one-night-only deal with someone outside our circle. We had to be safe and smart about it, and we had to let each other know when we were using the pass, at least a quick text if it was happening spontaneously. That year, we did everything we'd planned. I got on the dating apps and eventually found someone, a 30-year-old woman whose husband had just opened their marriage. She wasn't sure what she wanted from the arrangement and thought a one-night stand would be a good way to test the waters. I was the perfect fit since that was all I was looking for too. We met, had a fun night, and I let Emily know beforehand. She was happy for me, and when I got home the next day, she reclaimed me. I figured Emily would use her pass soon after, but I was wrong. Throughout the year, I kept asking if she'd found anyone. She always said no, mentioning that none of the profiles stood out, and maybe it was her. She told me she was interested in a younger guy, maybe around 25, but the ones she found seemed arrogant or immature. Almost 11 months in, Emily finally told me she was ready to use her hall pass. By then, I'd started feeling guilty, thinking she wasn't going to use hers. She explained that her situation was a bit unique and wanted to confirm if it still fit our rules because she didn't want to cross any lines. Emily told me that for the last 3 months, there had been a 23-year-old intern, Chris, working in another department at her company. They'd interacted here and there, mostly about work, since their departments often had to collaborate. She admitted she found him attractive, especially after realizing he wasn't just some clueless kid, but she also knew that hooking up with a coworker was a bad idea. Plus, there was a chance he might get hired full-time, and that would make things complicated with HR. But just a few days ago, Chris announced he'd be leaving the internship because he got a job in the same field with another company on the other side of the city. It seemed unlikely their paths would cross again, so Emily asked me if this was out of our lives enough to fit within our rules. I told her it sounded fine, just to be careful and smart. She assured me she would be, and she wouldn't make a move until after his last day. Fast forward a week, and the day arrived. As Chris was saying his goodbyes at the end of his last shift, Emily offered to walk him out, which he found a bit odd. When they reached his car, she made her move, asking if he'd be interested in having a fun night together. She explained that she had one hall pass, good for one night, and that she'd get a hotel room if he was up for it. Chris was interested but hesitant. He wasn't sure if it was really okay and didn't want to mess around with someone's marriage. So Emily put me on FaceTime, and Chris straight up asked if it was legit. I told him, "Yeah, man, I already used mine. You're her choice, so it's your call." According to Emily, that cleared up any doubts, and he was all in. He followed her to a hotel, and she came home the next morning. I reclaimed her, and life moved on. A couple of weeks went by, and our 11th anniversary rolled around. That same day, she stopped taking her birth control. 2 weeks later, Emily found out she was pregnant, which felt surprisingly fast. We booked an appointment, and today we learned she's actually around 7 weeks along. This lines up right with the timing of her hall pass night, but we'd also been having plenty of sex during that period, including the day after. Now I'm stuck in a whirlwind of uncertainty. She's pregnant, and there's a possibility the baby isn't mine. I'm feeling completely overwhelmed. Emily needed some air, so she went for a walk to clear her head. I'm just here, stewing, trying to figure out my next move while waiting for her to come back. This whole situation is a mess. The baby is here now. So let me catch you up on what's happened since that blow-up with Emily. After my last post, I was sitting at home, waiting for Emily to get back from her walk. When she did, we had a long conversation. I asked her if she'd used a condom with Chris, and she replied, "No, it didn't even cross my mind." I was floored and blurted out, "What happened to safe and smart?" Emily looked at me and said, "Is that what you meant?" "I thought you meant making sure they're not some psycho." I was on the pill. "I don't know why you're freaking out. I've never made anyone use a condom before, so why would I think to start now?" I shot back. "Really, Emily? I don't know. Maybe because you're not 21 anymore and you'd want to avoid catching something. Emily's eyes welled up with tears. I didn't want this to happen. I'm sorry, I just didn't think about it. Did you use condoms when you used your pass? Yes, I said. Every single time, better safe than sorry. I paused, then asked, how many times did you two, you know? She tilted her head, thinking for a moment. 5, she finally said. Jesus. I followed up. So he finished inside you 5 times? She shook her head. No, just twice. I gave her a blank stare, and she explained. I told him the same thing I always tell you and everyone before you. I replied flatly. You can finish wherever you want? Of course you did. At that point, she broke down crying. What do you want to do? She asked. I answered, I don't want to do anything right now. We should look into paternity tests just so we know. A couple of weeks later, we had a follow-up with her doctor. Emily asked about her birth control failing, and the doctor went through a list of questions. We figured out that an athlete's foot medication she'd been taking could reduce the effectiveness of her birth control, even though that's rare. Not rare enough, I guess. Later, I asked if the pharmacist had mentioned anything when she picked up the prescription. Emily shrugged. I don't know, I wasn't really listening. I checked the bottle later, and yep, there was a warning about birth control right on it. I was about to ask about getting a paternity test, but Emily gave me a look that told me not to. Once we were outside, I asked her why, and she said, I don't want to ruin my pregnancy. It's probably yours. We had sex twice as many times around that period, but if we take the test and it's not yours, she started tearing up. This is the only time I'm going to be pregnant. I'd rather believe I'm carrying your child than someone else's. I don't want to lose that. We've agreed we're keeping this baby, and you've told me you don't want us to separate, so can we just wait and do the test when the baby's here? I agreed. I wanted her to enjoy her only pregnancy. We did all the usual things during the rest of the pregnancy. Set up the nursery, got the car seat and baby supplies, and stocked up on diapers. We made plans, packed a go bag, and I baby-proofed the house as best I could. Our parents were thrilled and threw us a baby shower. The pregnancy was smooth overall, and after 39 weeks, our beautiful baby girl, Willow, was born. While we were still in the hospital, Emily asked if I wanted to get the paternity test done now that our daughter was here. I told her, no, I don't care anymore. This perfect little girl is mine, and I don't need a test to confirm that. I'm her dad, and she's my girl. Emily was overjoyed. I think it was exactly what she needed to hear. We were about to take our daughter home and enjoy every moment ahead of us. The chances of this ever becoming an issue again seemed slim. Fast forward 22 years. I made some posts back then detailing the situation with my wife Emily's pregnancy. To recap, we gave each other hall passes. Emily used hers, and her birth control failed, leaving us uncertain about the paternity of our baby. We decided to keep the baby no matter what, and chose not to get a paternity test, raising our daughter, Willow, together. Willow is now 22, a senior in college, and she always comes home for extended breaks and summers. Her university is only about an hour away, the same one Emily and I graduated from. She's an amazing young woman with a bright future ahead. This year, Willow asked if she could bring her boyfriend Carter home for the holidays. They've been together for about 9 months, and we agreed. The night they arrived, we had a big dinner planned. It was going great, and we were getting to know Carter. He seemed like a nice kid. He's from Oregon, but his grandparents live near the university, and that's why he chose to go to school here. Plus, it's where his dad went. Carter was curious about us too, and everything was fine until he asked Emily about her job. When she explained what she did, Carter said, "Oh, that's what my dad does." He went on to share that his dad interned at Emily's company before moving to a rival firm and eventually relocating to Oregon for a promotion. I saw Emily's face change, and I felt my stomach drop. I barely held it together. Emily, trying to stay calm, asked, "Carter, is that a nickname or were you named after the actor?" He laughed. Sort of, it's actually my last name, Woodson. My first name is Josh, but everyone's called me Woody since middle school. You know, because it was funny when we were 12 and I just rolled with it. Emily was visibly shaken. And what's your dad's name? I might remember him. Carter responded. Wesley Woodson, but most people call him Wes. I felt like I was going to faint. Emily and I played it cool, but Willow noticed and asked if something was wrong. We quickly changed the subject and ended up playing Mario Party 30 with them, trying to distract ourselves. Afterward, they went off to Willow's room, and we rushed into ours. What the hell? I blurted out. Emily was just as freaked out. I know, right? What are the odds? Out of all the people in the world, she ends up with him. Oh my God, she might be sleeping with her own brother. I was in denial. Are you sure? Maybe they're not even doing that. Emily shot me a look. Seriously? She tells me everything. Normally, I don't share these details with you because you can't handle it, but we've got to face this. She's just like we were in college. They've been sleeping together since their first date. And he's not her first either. You need to deal with this reality. I tried to ignore everything she said, wanting to bury my head in the sand again. We realized we couldn't just demand that Willow break up with Carter without raising suspicions. She'd ask questions, and we'd have no good answers. Plus, she's clearly into him, maybe even in love. With graduation coming up and life decisions on the horizon, we can't just sit back and hope this blows over. Now, we're at a point where we have to make some tough decisions. We realize that getting a paternity test is necessary, but this is bound to raise questions. So, we need to talk to Willow and be upfront with her because she's strong-willed and won't just accept anything without knowing the full story. We convinced her to send Josh back to his grandparents' place a half day early, giving us a little time to sort things out. It was an awkward day and a half, but we tried our best to keep everything normal so they wouldn't catch on. Then, we sat her down and explained the whole situation as delicately as possible, about the hall passes, about Wes, and our decision not to get a paternity test back then. Willow looked like she was going to be sick. She was furious and disgusted, and I can't blame her. In a single moment, she found out she might not know who her biological father is and that she could be in a sexual relationship with her half-brother. We got the paternity test done, and now we're stuck in this 5-day waiting period for the results. Willow's pretending to be sick to avoid seeing Josh and to keep him from coming back here. They're still talking, but she's sad, and her downcast tone is helping sell the whole sick act. She's just hoping the test results show that I'm her dad. I'll update once we know more, and this is all settled. It's been a month now, and I think we're finally starting to see the dust settle. Let's get right to the million-dollar question. Willow is not my biological daughter. She took it really hard. It wasn't just the news that I wasn't her father. She also realized she'd been in a relationship with her half-brother. It was devastating. We invited Josh back over, and he looked scared when he saw Willow crying. That's when we told him the truth about Emily and Wes, and how we never got a paternity test, figuring the odds of Willow and Josh finding each other were 1 in a billion. Josh was furious, storming out in shock. He came back later with his dad, Wes, on the phone. We explained that Willow was biologically his daughter. Wes remembered his night with Emily and was stunned. He said he'd get on the first flight here. Meanwhile, Willow wasn't willing to accept things as they were. She said, "This test only says you're not my father, not that his dad is mine. How do you know Mom didn't cheat?" Desperate for answers, she pushed for a DNA test between her and Josh. I knew what it would reveal, but I agreed if it gave her a little hope. Josh also agreed, and we sent the test off that day. Wes and his wife arrived the next day, and we showed them the paternity test results proving Willow wasn't mine. We also mentioned that we had tested Josh and Willow to confirm if they were siblings. Wes's wife was upset that we had tested Josh without their permission, feeling we were overstepping and disrupting their family's peace. You've already dropped a bomb that my husband has a secret child, and now you're doing whatever you want with our son," she said, clearly distraught. Wes and Willow took another paternity test that day, and we mailed it off. The Woodsons went to stay with their family while we stayed home, trying to process everything together. We scheduled individual counseling for Willow and a family therapy session for all of us. Those days felt impossibly hard. When the results came back, we called the Woodsons, who were planning to come over to open them with us. They arrived, and I opened the DNA test results first. Willow and Josh were not siblings. Relief washed over the room. I glanced at Emily. She looked utterly confused, which made me hesitate before letting my anger rise. What happened next, I never saw coming. Wes opened his paternity test, and it confirmed that he was indeed Willow's biological father. He looked confused. This doesn't make sense. How can I be her father, but they're not siblings? I understood immediately. I watched as the realization hit him, pain clearly visible in his eyes. He turned to his wife, who immediately went on the defensive, angrily claiming the tests must be wrong and accusing us of trying to scam them. Her erratic response confirmed everything. In the weeks since, Willow and Josh have broken up but are still staying friends. They've been through so much in such a short time, and they're leaning on each other for support. Willow told me that Wes has been digging into his life and has uncovered awful truths. He learned that his wife had been cheating on him for years, even before they got married. Woody's younger brother, who is 14, also turned out to be a product of her infidelity with a different father than Josh. To top it off, Wes found her very active account on a cheating forum where she boasted about her affairs, describing herself as living life to the fullest. Wes has already started the divorce process, and the prenup his parents insisted on will be a blessing. Wes called me today to ask about forming a relationship with Willow. He has a lot of mixed feelings, especially after being in the dark for over 20 years. But he wants to be involved now. I told him it's up to Willow to decide. We're still in family therapy, trying to help Willow navigate this mess. She's holding up pretty well, considering everything. I'm not sure what the future holds for all of us, but we're taking it one day at a time. Now, on to the next story, Story 7. I can't shake the feeling that something might be happening between my younger sister and my husband. My name is Emily, 30F, and I've been married to my husband, Jack, 32M, for 6 years. Our relationship is strong. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but we've grown from it and have a loving bond. Everything was going well until about 8 months ago when my sister, Sarah, 28F, moved back to our hometown. She had been living in Florida since she was 18, but returned after her long-term boyfriend dumped her and moved to another city, leaving her with nothing. The details of their breakup were a bit unclear. Sarah claimed he had been cheating on her with other men, but it seemed far-fetched to me. I only met him a few times, as Sarah usually only came home for Christmas and stayed for a few days. He accompanied her twice during their 5 years together, and we met him once more when Jack and I visited them for a day during our vacation 3 years ago. He didn't strike me as someone living a double life, and it was hard to believe he'd just leave Sarah with nothing. I tried reaching out to him once, but I was blocked, so I decided to let it go. When Sarah moved back, she moved in with our parents, Linda, 55F, and Tom, 56M. She struggled to find work during her first month back, so I suggested Jack might be able to help her out since he's a higher up at his company and could probably pull some strings. He did, and Sarah landed a job in his department, which was even in her field. For some context, Sarah and I have never been close. She's always been the golden child in our mom's eyes, and our dad just goes along with whatever mom wants. It's not obvious, just a lot of little things over the years, like when we both got cars at 16. I got an old Dodge Neon, while she got a much newer Mitsubishi Eclipse. Her dance practices, outfits, and competitions cost thousands, and my parents never hesitated. But when I'd ask for $50 for a local volleyball camp, they'd give it to me, but you'd think I was asking for a new car. The worst was when I got home 15 minutes late once, and they took my car away for a month. Meanwhile, when Sarah came home 2 hours late, smelling like pot, she just got a stern talking to. So when she left for college and stayed in Florida, I wasn't exactly heartbroken. Despite all that, Sarah started spending more time at our house. At first, I thought maybe she was trying to get closer to me, but then I noticed how comfortable she and Jack were getting. They'd have long conversations about anything, share inside jokes, and if I tried to join in, they'd just say, "Oh, it's a work thing." When I asked Jack, he brushed it off, saying they just had a lot in common and worked on projects together. The first real sign something was off came when Sarah would be at our house when I got home from work. Jack has a typical 8 to 4:30 schedule, while I work from 10 to 7. This started happening regularly, and when I asked, the answer was always, "We had some work stuff to finish." Then, about 2 months ago, something happened that made me question everything. I always make our bed with the pillowcases facing a certain way before leaving for work. One day, after Sarah had been over, I noticed 2 pillows were positioned differently when I got into bed that night. I asked Jack if he'd been in bed that day, and he looked startled, but quickly said no, insisting that I must have been mistaken. I checked his phone and laptop, but found nothing suspicious. They work together all day and hang out afterward, so why would they need to text? I felt like I was losing my mind. A couple of weeks ago, my parents invited us over for dinner. Everything was going smoothly until I saw something that stopped me cold. As Jack walked past Sarah, she lightly grabbed his arm, whispered something, and they touched foreheads briefly. Jack pulled away quickly and kept walking, while Sarah glanced at me with a sly smile before going back to what she was doing. I know this whole thing is a mountain of red flags, but I guess I didn't want to believe it. I've been in love with Jack since I was 21, and I can't picture him betraying me like this. So I've planned a weekend getaway to the city, and I'm going to ask him about everything. I really hope it's not what I think it is. Hey everyone, it's been 4 years since my last update, and a lot has happened. First, I want to give you an update on my life. I'm recently engaged. It took a lot of therapy to get myself back on track. I tried dating right after I got settled here in Minnesota. I went on one decent first date, but then the guy turned out to be a total jerk, and I swore off men for a while. That's when I went to therapy to process all the trauma from my husband and sister's betrayal and the abandonment by my parents. It took a full year of therapy before I met James, 37 million. Funny enough, he has the same name as my dad, which I'm still getting used to, haha. James is great. He's a chef and owns a successful restaurant and bar with his twin brother, Jack. I'm really excited about our future together, but enough about me. Let's get to the drama. About 9 months after I left, I had been completely no contact with my family. I didn't tell them where I moved, only a few friends and a couple of cousins who I was close to. One day I came home to my apartment and found a wedding invitation in the mail. It was for Jack and Sarah's wedding, with a cringy picture of them hugging in a sunflower field. Included was a letter from my parents, urging me to forgive and forget. They acknowledged that things didn't go smoothly, understatement of the year, but insisted, "We're a family, and families work through problems." They even had the nerve to say Sarah wanted me to be her bridesmaid, just like she was for me. Seriously, WTF. That letter reopened a lot of old wounds, and my therapist definitely earned their paycheck that week. Now, looking back, it's laughable, but at the time, it was rough. I didn't respond. I just figured out which cousin leaked my address and cut them off too. Fast forward to last week, and guess who shows up at my apartment? Jack. I don't live with James yet, but that's changing soon. Jack looked way too put together, like he was trying way too hard to impress. I asked, "What do you want?" He said, "I just want to talk. I'm so sorry for everything. Sarah and I are getting divorced. I found out she was cheating the whole time we were married. I don't expect you to take me back, but I think we need closure, for both of us." I just blinked at him. He must have lost his mind. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Closure? You made your bed, Jack. Did you really think her golden hoo-ha, that seen more action than a Holiday Inn, was going to change just because you slapped a ring on it? You're even dumber than I thought. I forgive nothing, want nothing, and you mean nothing to me. I'm better off now, and that's how it'll always be. You can go to hell." I turned, locked the door, and called my landlady. She's the sweetest old lady who knows all about my past. Jack was still hanging around in the hallway, and within minutes, her two nephews, who helped maintain the apartment, were there letting him know he wasn't welcome and was now banned from the property. They warned him that if he came back, the police would be called. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. My work schedule is a pretty chill 9 to 5 now, and most nights I head to the restaurant where James works. I hang out, keep out of the way, and enjoy the moments we get together. I've made friends with the staff, many of whom are James and Jack's family, and it feels like the family I always wanted. So, the next night, I'm at the restaurant when Jack walks in and just sits at my table. It's a slow Tuesday, so it's not busy. James noticed immediately, recognizing him from the pictures I'd shown him. He walked over and asked if everything was okay. Jack stuck out his hand, trying to play nice. James just looked at it and then asked me, "Want me to kick him out?" I replied, "Not yet. I have a question or two." Jack's eyes lit up like he thought he was winning something. What a tool. I looked Ryan in the eye and asked him to explain what happened between him and Sarah. I'll admit, it was pure morbid curiosity, and I was secretly hoping she got screwed over in the divorce. Ryan sighed and said, "She was having at least 2 affairs with married men. Old habits die hard, I guess. This started 2 years in. It was a tough time for me." I couldn't help but roll my eyes and interrupted, "Come on, Ryan. You're not that naive. Did you at least protect yourself, or did she get half of your stuff?" Ryan smirked and said, "I stuck it out almost another year so I could stash away some savings and sell off assets. In the end, she got way less than she could have." I nodded, then asked, "And what happened to her after that?" Ryan replied, "She had to move back in with your parents." Feeling satisfied, I leaned back and said, "That's all I needed to hear. You can go now." James, ever the protector, chimed in, "You heard her. Out of my restaurant." Ryan started to protest. "But no, I want to—" I cut him off. "No forgiveness, no closure. I just wanted to know my loser sister is back living at home. Now get out." James stood up and pointed towards the door. Ryan glanced around, seeing the glares from the bartender and 2 waitstaff members. Defeated, he tucked his tail and headed toward the exit. James added, "And if you ever come back—" Ryan quickly interjected, Yeah, I know. Cops, trespassing." After he left, everyone around checked on me, which was sweet, but also kind of embarrassing. James's family, who I absolutely adore, called to insist I stay with him for the next few days just to be safe. It was the kind of care I never got from my own family, and it meant a lot to me. I haven't heard from Ryan since, and I'm hoping I never do. Hey everyone, I didn't think I'd be back with another update, but here we are. First, a bit about me. I'm now a 41-year-old mom of 2 boys, 6 months and 2 months. James and I are doing great. I work part-time as an office manager for the restaurants and spend the rest of my time as a semi-stay-at-home mom. 3 years ago, James's cousin bought into the business, and we opened a second location. It's been a lot of work, but with the 3 of them deeply involved, both places are thriving, and they all get some personal time. Funny enough, I'm pretty sure I got pregnant staying with James after my last post, when his parents insisted I stay with him for safety. They joke it was part of their plan to become grandparents all along. Now, on to the recent drama. After Ryan tracked me down, I figured it was just a matter of time before my parents or sister showed up. It didn't happen immediately, though. I started to relax a bit, feeling secure with my support system, and I rejoined social media. I stayed no contact with most of my family, including extended relatives, but I knew they'd find me if they tried. Not long after our first son was born, I got my first message. It was from my mom. She gave a half-hearted apology, mumbled something about forgiveness, and inquired about her grandson. I was going to block her, but the idea that she thought my child was her grandchild really ticked me off. So I replied, "You don't have any grandchildren. I'm not your daughter, and my kids have no relation to you. If you want grandkids, maybe you should encourage Sarah to get out there and do what she does best." Then I blocked her. She kept making new accounts and trying to contact me, but I just ignored or deleted all her attempts. Recently, though, things escalated. I was bombarded with messages and requests, mostly sob stories about missing out on the grandkids and wanting to make amends. I had zero interest in reconnecting, so I didn't respond. Then Sarah started reaching out to me. Her messages were vague, just expressing a desire to talk. This went on for about 3 weeks before I agreed to a Zoom meeting. It was just me, no kids involved. When the call started, they immediately began asking to see the kids. I firmly shut that down. My boys have 3 grandparents, James's mom, dad, and grandma, and that's it. As the conversation went on, it became clear this wasn't just about seeing the kids. Sarah looked awful, and my parents seemed worn out and tired. They all started apologizing for everything that had happened. Even Sarah said she was wrong and wished she could have her sister back. It was almost laughable. Then my mom launched into her usual spiel about family sticking together and supporting each other. When she finished, I just stared at them and said, "Is that all? If so, I'm going to go now." They yelled for me to wait, and that's when the facade dropped. The real reason for their sudden interest was about to come out. Turns out, Sarah's been dealing with health problems for the last couple of years. For some reason, her kidneys are failing, and she's in desperate need of a transplant. That's why they were so persistent in trying to get in touch with me. Family members are the most likely to be viable donors. I looked at them and asked bluntly, "So that's why you called me? You want me to save her after everything she did? My husband wasn't enough, now she needs a piece of me too?" My mom snapped, "Stop being like this. That was all a long time ago." She started to choke up, tears streaming down her face. "I know you hate us, but she's going to die if she doesn't get a transplant soon. Is that what you want? I know you think she wronged you in the worst way, but can't we set that aside just this once?" I stayed quiet, waiting to see if they'd say anything more. Finally, my dad spoke up. "Look, we're sorry for everything that happened, but we're dealing with a lot right now. Between Sarah's medical bills and her not being able to work. Your mom and I are struggling too. We're getting older and we have our own issues. We need you to come back to Missouri to see if you're a match, and we could use some help too, or we might lose the house." "So, you need my kidney and my money," I said plainly. "Don't put it like that," he replied. Sarah jumped in. "Please just come home. I need my big sister. I don't want to die. Can you just see if you're a match? If you're not, we'll never contact you again." I told them I'd think about it and do some research, and I'd let them know tomorrow. I ended the call and went to talk to James. He told me he'd support me no matter what decision I made, and asked if we should all go together as a family, or if he should come with me. I said no to both. I was going, but I was going alone. I told my former family that I would get tested in Minnesota, and if I was a match, I'd come back to Missouri, and then we could discuss the rest. About a week later, the results came back, and it turned out Sarah and I were a perfect match. I agreed to come back to St. Charles. By the time I arrived, Sarah's condition had worsened, and she was admitted to the hospital. This got everyone off my back about meeting up for dinner, which was fine by me. I had no intention of spending any social time with them. And of course, my parents kept hinting about needing help with their financial issues whenever they had a moment alone with me. Sarah's condition stabilized, and I met with the doctors who would perform the transplant. They explained everything, and I asked to have the conversation in front of everyone. We all gathered in Sarah's room, My parents were already there. The doctor explained that without a transplant, Sarah had maybe 6 months left. They walked us through the procedure and emphasized how I was a near-perfect match. The chances of finding someone better were slim. They stressed that the sooner we scheduled the surgery, the better. I walked over to Sarah, took her hand, and looked straight into her eyes. "Did you hear that? I'm the perfect match. I'm basically the only person who can save you, and I'm not going to. You're the most vile, narcissistic piece of gutter trash I've ever known. I came here so you'd know that the one person who could save you is the one you wronged the most, and now you're paying for that with your life. You're going to die, Sarah. You should make peace with that." Sarah broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, and my parents turned on me, yelling. The doctor and nurse just stood there, stunned. I looked at my parents and said, "Don't even think about talking to me. And don't you ever dare ask me for anything, ever again. The only money I'd ever spend on you would be for your funerals, on the condition that you be cremated and the ashes given to me. And then, I'll dump them into the filthiest porta-john I can find." With that, I walked out of the room and never looked back. Now I'm back home, my real home, with my real family, and I couldn't be happier. Now on to the next story, story 8. My sister chose her absent, deadbeat biological father to walk her down the aisle instead of the man who actually raised her. In the end, none of them showed up to the wedding. I don't even know how to start talking about the complete mess that was my half-sister Nicole's 27F wedding this past weekend. For context, I'm 16, and Nicole and I are kind of close, but there's a big age gap between us. Let me backtrack so all of this makes sense. My mom, Karen, 51F, was married to this deadbeat named Gary for about 5 years. He's Nicole's dad. They split up when she was just 3 years old. He was kind of in and out of her life until she turned 7, and then he just vanished. Around the same time, my mom started dating my dad, Mike, 58M, and they got married when Nicole was 7. I showed up about 4 years later. I've always admired Nicole, even though we're not super tight. She was always kind to me, but with the 11-year gap, we never really hung out much, and my parents didn't make her babysit me. She went off to college when I was 7, so while we're close-ish, I feel like we could have been closer if we weren't so far apart in age. I don't even know how to start talking about the complete mess that was my half-sister Nicole's 27F wedding this past weekend. For context, I'm 16, and Nicole and I are kind of close, but there's a big age gap between us. Let me backtrack so all of this makes sense. My mom, Karen, 51F, was married to this deadbeat named Gary for about 5 years. He's Nicole's dad. They split up when she was just 3 years old. He was kind of in and out of her life until she turned 7, and then he just vanished. Around the same time, my mom started dating my dad, Mike, 58M, and they got married when Nicole was 7. I showed up about 4 years later. I've always admired Nicole, even though we're not super tight. She was always kind to me, but with the 11-year gap, we never really hung out much, and my parents didn't make her babysit me. She went off to college when I was 7, so while we're close-ish, I feel like we could have been closer if we weren't so far apart in age. So, all of this is based on what my mom has told me about Gary. She said when they were dating in college, Gary seemed like a great guy. They got married in a big wedding during their senior year, which Gary's dad paid for. My mom says that even though Gary liked to party and smoke weed back then, he worked really hard in school. My mom was pretty into the party scene too, so it all just kind of worked. But things took a turn after they graduated. Turns out, the only reason Gary worked so hard in college was that it was a requirement for him to get his inheritance. Gary's dad is loaded. He didn't get the money right away, though. Gary's dad made it clear that if Gary and his brothers had a degree and a family, they'd get their trust funds when they hit 30 or 40 or something like that. So Gary had the degree and was married to my mom. But after college, he didn't even try to find a real job. My mom got a good one right away, but Gary just drifted between jobs, living off my mom's income while smoking pot all day, and was fixated on having a kid. A year into their marriage, my mom got pregnant with Nicole, and that's when Gary completely checked out. My mom got a promotion around the same time, which was lucky because Gary couldn't be trusted alone with Nicole, so she had to pay for daycare even though Gary was home all day. It seemed like he'd hit his life goal and was just biding his time until he could cash in on his dad's deal. My mom tried to push him to do something, but he never budged, so she finally had enough and divorced him. Over the next few years, he was a terrible dad, missing scheduled visits, dropping Nicole off early, having no food in the house, and constantly asking my mom for money. She usually gave it to him because she didn't want Nicole to go without. When Nicole was 7, my mom married my dad, Mike. From what I've seen, Nicole and my dad have always had a good relationship. My mom let Mike be the fun parent with her, not so much with me, but that's another story. Still, there were a few times when he had to step up and be the bad guy. He coached her sports teams, took her dress shopping, and was generally involved in her life. Nicole even started calling him Dad, and for most of her life, that's who he was. In the 18 years Gary was gone, he only sent her 2 birthday cards, one when she was 8, probably the first year after he left, and another one when she was 14, which arrived almost 2 months late. So, for Nicole, my dad was her only real dad. But then, 2 years ago, Gary popped back up. Gary was around for about 6 months, trying to reconnect with Nicole, and for whatever reason, she let him back in. But just as quickly, he ghosted her again for another 6 months. A year ago, Gary reappeared and actually stuck around this time. He seems clean and sober now. Nicole's been including him in all the wedding plans, which has annoyed my parents since Gary has been nothing but opinionated without contributing financially. My parents have footed the bill for everything. To make things worse, Nicole started calling my dad stepdad when we're around other people, even though she still calls him dad when it's just us. As the wedding got closer, this really started to bother my parents. Nicole wouldn't clarify who she wanted to do things like walk her down the aisle, have the father-daughter dance, or give a speech. She kept saying she'd decide at the rehearsal dinner. My mom kept reminding her of Gary's absence and my dad's presence in her life. But Nicole didn't seem to get the message. Going into the wedding, I knew my parents were going to be mad because it was obvious Nicole was planning to split these big moments between Gary and my dad. We got to the rehearsal dinner on Thursday. Everyone was gathered, and Nicole started going over who would be doing what during the wedding. That's when she dropped the bomb. She wanted Gary to do all the traditional father roles. I saw the hurt on my dad's face and the fury on my mom's, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. My mom stood up and said, "Why would you choose him for any of that? He's barely been around." The room went dead silent. After a moment, Nicole said, "We've missed so much time together, and I want to start making memories now. I don't see why you have to make this a thing. It's important to me to have these moments with my real father." Then my mom dropped the real bombshell. "If you want your real father, you should be choosing Mike, because he is your real father." Nicole, now crying, looked confused and said, "What are you talking about?" That's when my dad pulled out some folded-up papers. They were results from a paternity test taken when Nicole was 3 years old. The papers clearly showed that my dad was actually her biological father. Gary grabbed a copy, his face turning red with rage, and shouted, "What the hell is this, you lying bitch?" My mom shot back, "Oh, please. The second we graduated, I knew you were a worthless loser, and you've proven me right time and again. You've been nothing but a fake, wasting years of my life. I've got my reasons for everything that's happened, and I don't owe you any explanations, Gary. You never noticed or figured out a thing anyway. God, I can't stand you. If you had just stayed gone, everything would have been fine. Now you've got no reason to stick around. Go crawl back into whatever gutter you came from and drink yourself into oblivion." At this point, Nicole and her fiancé stormed out, with Nicole in tears. The rest of the guests sat in shock, and Gary was boiling over. He charged at my mom and dad, but it was a terrible move. Gary's about 5'10" with the body of a guy who's been drinking and smoking his whole life, while my dad's a solid 6'3" and built like he spent the last 30 years in the gym. The slap my dad gave Gary was like a thunderclap. It literally knocked him off his feet. And yes, you read that right. It was just a slap. Gary stayed down, stunned and defeated. My dad calmly told him, "Don't try that again, or next time I won't be so nice." After that, my parents came over and asked if I could ride home with my grandparents since they needed some time alone. I told them that was fine. I didn't hear anything else until the next day. Gary disappeared again, and no one has seen him since. My parents called to let me know they wouldn't be at the wedding. They said they had talked to Nicole, and she was a wreck. She'd asked them not to come, and my parents understood. They didn't want to make things worse. The wedding did go on Saturday. I ended up walking Nicole down the aisle, and most of the guests still showed up. The only ones missing were a few of Gary's relatives and my parents. The ceremony itself was nice, but you could see the sadness in Nicole's eyes. She tried to enjoy the day, but it was clear she was struggling. They left for their honeymoon the next day, and I stayed with my grandparents while everything was happening. I got back home today, and my parents said they'd answer any questions I had. I'm not even sure what I want to know at this point. Everything just feels so messed up. I hope I'll get the chance to update everyone once Nicole gets back. I know this isn't the update everyone was hoping for, but Nicole's still away on her honeymoon. I finally mustered up the courage to ask my parents about what happened at the rehearsal dinner. For those who guessed money was involved, you hit the nail on the head. After a year of marriage, with Gary doing nothing, my mom told him she wanted a divorce. Gary knew his dad wouldn't give him anything if he got divorced, at least not right away. He begged my mom to stay until he got his inheritance. Then, they'd split and she'd get half. My mom agreed, but mentally checked out of the marriage. She started going out more, and that's when she met my dad, Mike, and began seeing him behind Gary's back. I asked why all the secrecy if they were both just in it for the money. My mom said it was because if she got caught cheating, Gary could use that as an excuse to divorce her without his dad cutting him off. My mom admitted she messed up and got pregnant by my dad. I asked her if Gary would have figured it out, considering they were just faking the marriage. She said, "This is probably too much info, but once I knew I was pregnant, I had to, do what I had to do to keep up the act." Gross. When Nicole was born, Gary's name went on the birth certificate. My mom stuck it out for 3 years, hoping they'd get the inheritance money, but eventually she'd had enough and divorced him. She didn't give up on the idea entirely, though. Knowing Gary was a total screw-up who'd likely never get his life together, she decided to keep pretending that Nicole was his daughter, hoping Nicole could eventually get the money. My mom said this turned into a long con, which I'm pretty sure she just said to sound cool. I know she picked up that term from watching too much Lost. Luckily, Gary's dad was not the grandparent type. He didn't want to be around Nicole at all. Mom said he was one of those children should be seen, not heard kind of guys. So she kept sending him pictures and letters about all of Nicole's accomplishments, even after Gary disappeared from our lives. It took another 8 years, but she eventually convinced him, who by then had completely given up on Gary, to give Gary's share of the inheritance to Nicole. That amounted to $350,000. By the time Nicole was 15, Gary's dad was still around, and my mom worried about possible legal trouble if the truth came out, so she never told anyone. Gary had been gone for 8 years, and Nicole had developed a strong bond with our dad. She'd been calling him Dad for years by then. Mom admits she was wrong not to tell Nicole, but given everything, she thought things were fine and didn't want to mess that up. Every penny of the money went towards Nicole. It covered her 4.5 years of college, grad school, a new car when she graduated high school, her rent after she moved out of the dorms, and a monthly allowance. The rest was used for her wedding and honeymoon. My parents do well financially, but we're not rich by any means. Gary's dad passed away about 2.5 years ago, and that's when Gary tried to claim his inheritance, only to find out it had already been given to Nicole. That's when he showed up for those 6 months, trying to reconnect with her. After about half a year, he asked my mom about the money, and she told him it was gone. That's when he disappeared again, and my mom hoped it was for good. Since it had been so long, she decided to let the lie stand. She regrets it now, but didn't want to disrupt the family's peace. But Gary came back and hung around all last year. He wouldn't leave, and Nicole kept getting closer to him. My mom kept hoping he'd screw up again and disappear, but it never happened. When Nicole started pushing my dad aside, it really hurt them. They both admitted they made a bad call but felt desperate to get Gary out of the picture. They hoped Nicole would pick my dad for the father roles, and when she didn't, they dropped the truth bomb. They regret how things went down at the wedding and not telling her sooner, but they know they can't change the past. They're committed to making it up to her when she gets back and asked me to keep being a supportive brother. I know this might not be the update everyone was hoping for, but Nicole's still on her honeymoon. It took me a few days, but I finally worked up the courage to ask my parents about what happened at the rehearsal dinner. For those who guessed it was about money, congrats, you got it right. After a year of marriage, and with Gary doing absolutely nothing, my mom told him she wanted a divorce. Gary knew his dad would never give him anything if he got divorced, at least not anytime soon. He begged my mom to stick around until he got the inheritance, then they'd split, and she'd get half. She agreed but mentally checked out of the marriage. That's when she started going out and met my dad, Mike, seeing him behind Gary's back. When I asked why all the secrecy if they were just in it for the money, she said it was because if she got caught cheating, Gary might have grounds to divorce her without angering his dad and losing his inheritance. My mom admitted she messed up when she got pregnant by my dad. I asked her if Gary would have figured out Nicole wasn't his, considering they were faking the whole marriage. She replied, "This is probably too much information, but once I found out I was pregnant, I did what I had to do." Gross, I know. When Nicole was born, Gary's name went on the birth certificate. My mom stuck around for 3 years, hoping to get the inheritance money, but eventually she'd had enough and divorced him. She didn't completely give up, though. She knew Gary was a total mess and likely wouldn't ever get his act together. So, if she could keep up the charade that Nicole was his daughter, there was a chance Nicole could still get the money. My mom said it was a long con, though she only used that term because she picked it up from watching Lost. Thankfully, Gary's dad wasn't involved as a grandparent. He didn't want anything to do with Nicole. Mom said he was the type who thought kids should be seen and not heard. She kept sending him pictures and letters about Nicole's accomplishments, even after Gary disappeared. It took about 8 more years, but she eventually convinced him, who by then had completely given up on his son, to give Gary's inheritance share to Nicole. That ended up being $350,000. Nicole was 15 when this happened, and Gary's dad was still alive. My mom was terrified of legal trouble if the truth ever came out, so she kept quiet. By then, Gary had been out of the picture for 8 years, and Nicole and our dad had really bonded. She'd been calling him Dad for a long time. Mom admits she was wrong not to tell Nicole at some point, but with how things were going, she didn't want to disrupt anything. The entire sum went toward Nicole. It covered her 4.5 years of college, grad school, a brand new car when she graduated high school, her rent when she moved off campus, and a monthly allowance for whatever she wanted. The remaining funds went to her wedding and honeymoon. My parents do well financially, but were far from wealthy. About 2.5 years ago, Gary's dad passed away. Mom knew that Gary tried to claim his inheritance, only to find out it had already gone to Nicole. That was when he resurfaced for 6 months, trying to reconnect with her. Eventually, Gary asked Mom about the money, and she told him it was all spent. That's when he vanished again. and Mom hoped it was the last time they'd hear from him. Since so much time had passed, she decided to let the lie rest, figuring it wasn't worth disrupting everyone's peace. But then Gary came back and wouldn't leave, hanging around for the entire year. Nicole kept growing closer to him, and Mom kept hoping he'd screw up or disappear, but that never happened. When Nicole started pushing my dad aside, it really bothered them. They both admit they made poor choices, but were desperate to get Gary out of the picture. They had hoped Nicole would choose my dad for the fatherly roles at the wedding, and when she didn't, they felt like they had no choice but to reveal everything. They regret how things unfolded at the wedding and not telling Nicole sooner, but they know there's no undoing it now. They're committed to making things right when Nicole gets back and asked me to keep being a supportive brother. Now on to the next story, story 9. My wife cheated with my best friends on vacation. I took her attempts to make amends, then filed for divorce. It's been over 4 years since this all went down. Back then, I was 37, and my wife Karen was 36. We'd been together for 16 years, married for 13, and lived a comfortable upper-middle-class life with our 15-year-old daughter, Lily. I had 2 best friends from college, Dave and Jason. Dave, who was 35, was married to Megan, who was 31, and Jason, also 35, had recently divorced that spring. Through our friendship, Karen and Megan had also become best friends. As a group, the 3 couples had a tradition of taking a week-long vacation every summer for several years. Everything was all set for our trip when I broke my ankle just 3 days before our flight. I decided not to go. I was going to be on crutches for 16 weeks. The meds made me drowsy, and I just didn't want to drag everyone down. Karen offered to stay home with me, but I convinced her to go and have fun without me. When Karen got back from the trip, she was like a whole new person. She'd been stressed out at work for a while, so I figured the vacation was exactly what she needed. She was more affectionate than usual, almost to the point of smothering me with attention and affection. I wasn't complaining, though. Our sex life felt like we were in our early 20s again. I just thought it was her feeling guilty for leaving me behind and the relief of a break from her hectic job. Then, a couple of weeks after Thanksgiving, things were still going well. Karen and Megan planned a girls' shopping weekend a few hours away, complete with a Saturday night stay at a hotel. That's when things took a nosedive. We were all on Snapchat because Dave and Megan had nieces who only communicated through it, and I found it helpful for keeping in touch with Lily, who barely responded to texts but would always snap back. We'd often send each other goofy stuff in our group chats. That night, I sent Karen a snap of the dog and, out of habit, flipped to the snap map. That's when I saw it. Karen, Megan, and Jason, all in the same place? They were in a town 2.5 hours away, staying at the same hotel. It made no sense. Why would Jason be at the same hotel as Karen and Megan? My mind went straight to the worst possible conclusion. I tried calling Karen, but she didn't pick up. I called again, then again, and after the 4th call went unanswered, I was ready to get in my car and drive there myself. But then I remembered Lily was home, and I couldn't just leave her alone late at night to drive 2.5 hours. I paused and tried to think straight. Dave's wife was also on the trip. Maybe he knew what was going on. I called Dave and he answered. I told him what I saw on the snap map, expecting him to be as confused as I was. But he wasn't. He didn't sound surprised or worried, which momentarily calmed me down. But then, with a heavy tone, he confirmed my worst fear. He said, "Yeah, they're all there. Megan and Jason finally talked Karen into having another threesome with them." Another threesome? What the hell? I felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. My heart felt like it sank into my shoes. After a few moments of shock, I managed to pull myself together and told Dave, "You better tell me everything right now." Dave, sounding defeated, agreed. He explained that it all started during the vacation in July. It was a 5-day trip once you took out the travel days. The first day was spent relaxing by the pool at the Airbnb, nothing too crazy. But things started getting weird on the second day. I knew they had a full day planned, and since Jason and Karen were the only ones there without their spouses, they naturally hung out together. At first, it all seemed friendly and innocent, but Dave noticed that as the day went on, they got more comfortable with each other. That night, everyone drank a lot at dinner back at the house, and things just kept escalating. Megan noticed Karen and Jason getting flirty and touchy. After a while, Dave and Megan decided to head to their room, leaving Karen and Jason alone. About an hour later, Megan felt uneasy and decided to sneak out to see what was going on. She checked Karen's room, but it was empty. Then, she tiptoed to Jason's room, where she heard unmistakable sounds of two drunk people trying to keep quiet while having sex. Megan went back to her room and told Dave everything. I cut him off right there and said, "How could Megan just let this happen? You said she noticed them getting cozy during dinner. Why didn't she pull Karen aside and put a stop to it?" Dave responded coldly, "Because we didn't want to." Apparently, Dave and Megan had been toying with the idea of an open relationship. They had agreed that if something happened on the trip, they'd just let it play out. Dave then admitted he'd always had a thing for my wife and saw this as his chance, and he took it. That felt like another punch to the gut. It was bad enough to find out that one of my closest friends had been fooling around with my wife, but now I was learning that the other one had betrayed me too. I blew up on him, cursed him out, and he just sat there, taking it, mumbling apologies and making excuses. I told him to shove those apologies and just finish the story. The next morning, Megan pulled Karen aside to talk about what happened. Karen was feeling the expected guilt and was terrified of getting caught, especially since there were witnesses. She admitted it was a huge mistake, but also confessed that it was really good, especially for drunk sex. Megan told her, "Why stop? Jason just got divorced. You've been stressed with work for a year, and this is vacation. You left everything at home, your job, Chuck, Lily. This is a week away from your whole life. Think of it as a free pass. Dave and I won't say anything, and we'll cover if anything comes up." Karen liked the idea but was still nervous, so she went to talk to Jason. Then Jason went to Dave, asking if they were really serious about letting it continue. Dave told him, "Yes, just enjoy the week." But the truth was, Dave had his own plan to get with my wife. According to Dave, they kept to the scheduled plans for the next 3 days, and I can confirm that because all the usual Instagram and Facebook posts went up. I kept getting added to the group snaps, and Karen would call me twice a day to check in, along with random texts throughout the day. I had no clue anything was off while I was back home, stuck on the couch. Over those final days, Jason and Karen were basically acting like a couple. They made sure that any photos, posts, or snaps looked innocent, but when they weren't posing for social media, they couldn't keep their hands off each other. As soon as they got back to the Airbnb, it was straight to Jason's room. They weren't quiet either. It was obvious what was happening and for how long. Dave, desperate to get his own chance with Karen, pressured Megan into suggesting a partner swap on the last night. He's not entirely sure what was said, but he knows she and everyone else agreed. I interrupted and said, "I don't need the details." Dave replied, "Actually, you do. It ties into where she is now." On that last night, they swapped partners. Dave finally got his chance with Karen, but he admitted he got overly excited, and it didn't last long at all. That's when Karen just got up, went down the hall, and joined Jason and Megan again. Dave's pride was shattered as he listened to them down the hall, going at it for what felt like forever. In fact, Megan never even came back to their bed that night. This was the first time Dave felt any regret about pushing for an open marriage. The next day, they all traveled back, each swearing they'd take what happened to the grave. Dave continued, explaining that as soon as they got home, Megan, who was initially hesitant, was now all in on the open relationship. Dave still thought it could work in his favor, even though doubts were creeping in. They hashed out some ground rules. Dave wanted to have a list of people who were off limits, but Megan shot that down. She argued that being open meant no restrictions, and it had to apply equally to both of them. She said if he wanted to sleep with her sister, that was fine, and she didn't want any co-workers, exes, or anyone else to be off her list either. They reluctantly agreed to each other's terms: total transparency, access to everything. They even made videos of each other agreeing to the arrangement, so neither could weaponize it in a divorce. Listening to this, all I could think was, this guy is a total idiot. Dave then shared how terribly everything had spiraled. Megan had been very active, while Dave hadn't even managed a single date. Over the months, it only widened the gap between them, and he confessed that he already had divorce papers drawn up. He then offered to share all the evidence he had. I took it. Shortly after our conversation, a whole folder of evidence popped up in my inbox. Most of it was videos and photos of Megan with other men, co-workers, randoms. She'd been busy. But there were also plenty of messages between Karen and Megan. I picked up on the fact that Megan and Jason had started a regular affair about 4 months earlier. About a month ago, the idea of the threesome had come up. During this whole time after the vacation, Karen had been acting great towards me and seemed much happier than before. At the start of their conversations, Karen kept saying that what happened on vacation was just a one-time thing, a break from reality, and that it was over now. She was adamant that life should just go back to normal. But about 2 weeks ago, she started to show some interest in repeating that final vacation day, thanks to Megan's encouragement. That's when Jason joined the conversation. Karen eventually agreed, and they put the plan into action. On top of that, Dave had photos of Karen and Jason kissing, and even a recording of them having sex. That scumbag had secretly recorded it. It wasn't the best quality, but it was clear enough to see her face and her tattoo. I thanked him for sending me the evidence. He tried to apologize again, and I told him he was a piece of trash and that he better never contact me again. With the whole betrayal laid bare, it was time to turn my focus back to my wife. During the entire time I was talking to Dave, I still hadn't heard back from Karen. I called her 2 more times and then finally said screw it and sent her a photo of her and Jason kissing. The return call came immediately. I ignored it. She kept calling, and I kept refusing to answer. Eventually, she switched to texting. Her first text was as cliché as it gets. I can explain. I shot back, don't bother. I got the whole story from Dave. Tell your trashy little friend she's getting divorce papers too, just like you will on Monday. Then I blocked her number. Karen stormed into the house around 1:30 in the morning, frantic. She immediately broke down crying and tried to hug me. I stepped back, blocking her, and she started sobbing, apologizing, and begging me to forgive her. I told her to save it. We had a lot to talk about. I wanted every question answered truthfully. If I felt like she was lying, I'd end the conversation right there and file for divorce on Monday. I had a pile of evidence and wasn't afraid to use it. I looked her in the eye and asked, "What do you want?" She said she wanted to prove how sorry she was, work for forgiveness, and try to fix our relationship. I told her I wasn't sure that was even possible, but I'd let her explain herself. I asked her why she cheated in the first place. She said she had a lot of fun that day, felt good and relaxed, and hadn't felt that way in a long time. Work had been weighing her down for months. She said she let the moment and the drinks take over and just went with it. She tried to tell me how guilty she felt afterward, but I cut her off. "Okay," I said. "Not excusing it, not forgiving it, but that might explain the first time, the drunk sex. It doesn't explain the rest of the week. You weren't drunk when you were hooking up 3 to 4 times a day for the rest of the trip, and you definitely weren't drunk when you slept with Dave, and then went right back to having sex with the other 2. She looked at me through her tears and said, "When in Rome..." I couldn't believe it. "Are you kidding me? That's your excuse?" She tried again. "Look, let's be real. What's the difference between 1 time and 100? You'd still be this mad. Once I'd messed up, what was the point in stopping? Would you really feel any different?" I was in a fantasy world and just leaned into it while I could. I never meant for you to find out, and I never planned to do this again. I wish I could undo it all." I was stunned. "That's the worst thing I've ever heard," I told her. She just replied, "You asked for honesty." I asked if she was unhappy with me, if she didn't love me anymore, if I didn't satisfy her. She insisted, "No, I love you. I'm happy. It's not that." She said our marriage was good, but she craved excitement and feeling wild again. Things had gotten a little routine, and this felt thrilling. She had planned to have all this wild sex with me on the trip, but when I didn't go, she figured that idea was dead. Then when the chance came up, she just let herself get carried away. I asked her about the partner swap. She admitted it was a huge mistake. Megan had talked to her about it on the last day of the trip, explaining how she and Dave were trying out an open relationship. Megan told her it was perfect, because Karen wouldn't even be losing me, just Jason. Karen confessed she was a bit curious about Dave, but also felt some obligation. Like if Megan and Dave were going to keep their secret, this was her way of paying them back and making sure they had something to lose too. I asked her about that weekend and why she'd agreed to go through with it if she was supposedly so sorry about cheating the first time. Karen insisted she had never planned on crossing the line again and swore she was determined to make our relationship better from that point on. Now, when I think back on those months after the vacation, it makes me sick. Karen had been talking to Megan like usual, and Megan seemed to be living it up with her new open relationship. Karen admitted she was a little jealous. Megan had been with several guys, and Karen was living vicariously through her stories. When Megan started her affair with Jason, Karen knew exactly what she was missing out on, and found herself feeling even more envious. For context, I knew Jason had a reputation back in college as a ladies' man, and if I'm being honest, he was the best looking out of the three of us. He'd kept himself in great shape over the years, and it seemed like his fitness had only improved since his divorce. Karen told me that when the threesome idea first came up, she tried to resist, but as the weeks went by, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She said she gave in because the spontaneous one had been so good, and she genuinely thought she could get away with it. Then she asked how I'd found out, and I told her I didn't have to answer that. I asked if there was anything else she needed to tell me, and she said no. She claimed she just wanted a chance to rebuild trust, earn forgiveness, and work things out. I told her I didn't buy it. "Come on," I said. 16 years of being faithful, and then you go full porn star with my two best friends for an entire week." She swore she'd been completely loyal until then and offered me her phone, laptop, old devices, and email accounts. I told her, "I don't need any of that. It doesn't change anything. You've done enough already. I'm hurt, betrayed, and I can't stand to look at you. I'm done. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." When I woke up that Monday morning, Karen was still home. Normally, she'd be on her way to the office, but she'd taken the day off, assuming I'd done the same. Once Lily was off to school, Karen started up with the love bombing again. I told her I wasn't interested. I'd seen all of this before. She said she had a proposal for me, full access to her phone and accounts at all times, marriage counseling, individual therapy, cutting off Megan, Jason, anyone I wanted, whatever it took to prove she was committed to fixing things. I told her those were just things people do when they want to reconcile, but I didn't want to be a warden in my own home. I didn't want reconciliation. She begged me to wait 1 week, just 1 week, and if by next Monday I still felt the same, she'd agree to a no-contest divorce. I looked her in the eye and said, "You swear to that? No dragging it out? No contesting anything?" She swore she'd keep her word. I agreed to the week. It seemed worth the risk. If she honored her promise, we'd save time and money. If not, it'd just be one awkward, miserable week. Throughout the week, Karen kept up the love bombing and tried repeatedly to initiate sex. I refused her advances, and on Thursday night I told her nothing had changed. I still planned to file on Monday. She broke down, sobbing, and ran into the guest room, where she stayed until the next morning. On Friday after work, I could sense she had something planned. I honestly didn't care. I was counting down the hours until I could be rid of her. The constant love bombing was wearing on me, and her desperate attempts to win me over were just becoming irritating. She told me she felt we couldn't move forward because of the imbalance her cheating had caused. At first, I wasn't sure what she was hinting at, but then it became clear. Karen suggested we have a threesome. I told her she'd done much more than that. She then said I could have a week off from the marriage, where I could do whatever I wanted. I pointed out how pointless that was. I'd just heard all about Dave's disastrous open marriage. I'm just a regular guy, and unless you're wealthy or famous, picking up women isn't exactly easy, especially as a married guy in his mid-30s. I wasn't about to waste my time sitting in bars or scrolling through dating apps. She then said, "Okay, you can have 10 hall passes that never expire. You can use them on the same woman or 10 different ones." I shot back, "And you think that won't mess with our lives? You'd be fine with that?" She swore she'd make sure it wouldn't affect us, that she'd be available for whatever I needed, and that we could do anything I ever wanted. I knew what I did next was sleazy. Maybe not as bad as what she did, but still sleazy. But at that point, I honestly didn't care. I made it clear to Karen that these so-called concessions couldn't just be a way to buy time. If she wanted me to stick around, then these things needed to happen fast. I told her that arranging the threesome needed to be her priority. I set a deadline. She had until February 1st to make it happen, or I was out. I have no clue how she pulled it off, but between Christmas and New Year's, she showed me a picture of a woman from her spin class. This woman was stunning, and I couldn't believe how quickly Karen found someone, especially someone so attractive. Her name was Tiffany, and she was 24 years old. She and Karen had been chatting casually at spin class for months, just the usual small talk. When I asked how she managed to convince Tiffany, Karen just said she had her ways. I assumed she'd offered her money. About 2 weeks later, the big night finally arrived. I made sure to keep Karen involved and didn't want her to feel left out, even though I was there to have my fun. I figured that if she felt included, she'd think things were headed in the right direction for us. I wasn't wrong. Karen told me afterward that she only did it to try and win me back, but she ended up really enjoying the experience. Leading up to that night, Karen had been holding up her end of the deal by being overtly sexual with me, and after the threesome, it seemed like it wasn't just an obligation anymore. She actually seemed excited to be with me and try new things. I think part of her hoped that I'd forget about the hall passes. In mid-February, I used my first hall pass. There was this 27-year-old restaurant manager named Brooke who worked near my office. I'd been to her restaurant a lot and always thought she seemed a little flirty. I decided to ask her out, telling her I was 2 months into my divorce, which wasn't true. I said we were still living in the same house, but I had moved into the basement. Also, not true. Brooke was hesitant, but eventually agreed to go out. Later, when I asked her why she had agreed knowing my situation, she said she had noticed the first time I came in without my wedding ring. She figured I wasn't just taking it off to meet women because my tan line had faded. It meant I wasn't wearing it at all anymore. Meanwhile, Karen kept pushing for us to start marriage counseling. I held my ground and refused to go until I'd used all my passes. By April, I'd seen Brooke 7 times, and it was tearing Karen apart. I regret it now, but back then, I felt justified. As I got closer to using up all my passes, I realized I was more interested in having something serious with Brooke. It was time to stop pretending we were working things out. I think by then I had hurt Karen enough that she was done too, and I still feel a lot of guilt about that. When I told her it wasn't working and that I still wanted a divorce, she didn't fight me on it. She seemed sad and defeated, but she didn't resist. I found a small 2-bedroom house and moved out, leaving Karen in our family home. When I sat Lily down to tell her we were divorcing, I told her the truth, at least as much as was appropriate. I didn't place all the blame on her mom and owned up to my own behavior. I made sure she knew we both loved her and wanted the best for her, but that we had wronged each other and needed to separate. The three of us decided that 50-50 custody was best, so Lily would spend alternate weeks at each of our homes. Our divorce was finalized in October. I dated Brooke the entire time. Lily and Brooke got along well enough, and I was grateful that Lily didn't see her as the other woman. They never developed a step-parent relationship, but they were friendly, like a kid is with their parents' friends. My relationship with Brooke lasted about 2 years, but it ended because I didn't want to remarry or have more kids. Karen had been dating sporadically during that time, and she was in a relationship with one guy for about 11 months. Then, something unexpected happened this past spring. Throughout it all, Karen and I managed to co-parent effectively. The one thing we both agreed on was that we wanted to be there for Lily, and we remained civil at all her events for her sake. At Lily's high school graduation, Karen and I ended up sitting next to each other. What should have felt awkward actually wasn't. We joked, talked, and even flirted a little. It felt nice. A week later, I couldn't stop thinking about how much fun we'd had, so I called Karen and asked her out. She flatly said, "Absolutely not." I felt embarrassed, but then she continued after a long pause. "Unless we start couples counseling." I agreed, and we had our first session that Thursday, followed by our second first date that Friday. It's been 6 months since that graduation. We're still doing counseling, dating, and are slowly exploring the idea of alternative lifestyles. Things are going well, and Karen even brought up the idea of me moving back into our family home. Lily says it's weird seeing us together again. When she came home from her first semester of college, she told me she wasn't sure if she was happy or concerned. She just knew she didn't want to hear any details about any of our escapades. As for the others, Dave divorced Megan and took off. He put in a work transfer and now lives 4 states away. Jason and Megan tried to make a relationship work for about a month after her divorce, but it fizzled quickly. Karen reconnected with Megan after our divorce and found out that sex was the only thing they really had in common. Megan ended up remarrying a guy who used to work with Dave, and the company transferred him when he got promoted to a regional manager position. He's now Dave's direct boss, which I found hilarious. Little did the guy know, Dave and Megan started having an affair behind his back. I say did because apparently someone tipped him off, and now he's out for revenge. As for Jason, or motherfucker Mike as I call him, he's still single and hanging around. He got jumped one night after leaving a local bar by some masked assailant. Rumor has it, he got beat up pretty badly and even kicked in the balls a dozen times. I don't know what the future holds, but for now, I can't complain. If things get interesting again, I'll be sure to update everyone. Thanks for reading. P.S. Karen paid Tiffany $350 for the threesome.